The air in the sealed vault beneath the monastery at Skellig Michael, off the coast of Ireland, was cold, damp and heavy, with the scent of stone that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and something else, something indefinable, like the faint echo of a prophecy spoken in tongues that predated Christianity, preserved by monks who understood that what they were guarding was older than their faith and would outlast it. A single shaft of light filtered through a precisely engineered aperture that aligned with the constellation Draco during the autumn equinox, illuminated a stone altar, and upon this altar rested a scroll bound with chains of gold and silver intertwined in the pattern of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail. The scroll bore inscriptions in Ogham script mixed with symbols that seemed to be star maps, and when the chains were finally removed by hands that trembled with recognition of what they held, the parchment revealed words written in Old Irish that seemed to pulse with their own luminescence. In the age when the dragon sleeps beneath the earth and humanity dreams the dream of separation, when the serpent wisdom is called evil and the divine feminine is suppressed, there will come a time of awakening, and the signs will be these. The children will be born remembering what their parents forgot. The earth herself will shake off the structures that bind her. The hidden teachings will emerge from every tradition simultaneously as if called forth by signal only they can hear. And those who carry the dragon blood in their veins will feel the fire rising, will know without being told that they are part of an ancient lineage awakening to its purpose, and the prophecy that was buried will surface, and the dragon that was sleeping will open its eyes, and what was called myth will be revealed as memory, and what was dismissed as fantasy will manifest as the reality humanity is becoming. Before this scroll, a lone figure stood in profound stillness, their entire being vibrating with the recognition that they had found what countless seekers had died trying to locate. That the dragon prophecy was not legend, but was actual transmission from initiates who had foreseen this moment, this awakening, this return of the serpent wisdom that every patriarchal religion had worked to erase. What if every culture's myths about dragons, from China to Wales to Mesoamerica, were not independent fantasies, but were fragmented memories of an actual time when beings of higher consciousness, whether we call them dragons or serpent gods or the Watchers, walked among humanity and taught the mysteries of energy and consciousness? And what if they departed or went into dormancy when humanity was not ready for what they offered, but left behind a prophecy that when the cosmic cycles turned and the age of forgetting ended, they would return, not as external saviors, but as awakening within those humans who carried their genetics, their teachings, their consciousness encoded in bloodlines that had preserved the dragon fire through millennia of suppression. And what if that prophecy is activating now? What if the dragon is waking now? What if those who feel the serpent power rising in their spines are not experiencing individual Kundalini awakening, but are participating in collective activation, the return of dragon consciousness to a world that desperately needs the wisdom that was buried? What timeless secret did this impossible scroll preserve? And what profound revelation awaited the one who dared to accept that the dragon prophecy was not about the past or distant future, but was about now? About the awakening that is happening in this very moment to those who have the courage to feel the fire and claim their inheritance as children of the dragon. My name is Lyra, and the call to something beyond had been a persistent fire in my blood since before I could form words, manifesting first as dreams of flying over landscapes that no longer existed, of breathing fire that was not destruction but was transformation, of knowing myself as both human and something more, something ancient, something that the modern world had no category for, but that every bone in my body recognized as true. In these dreams, I was not alone but was part of a great gathering, thousands or perhaps millions of beings who looked human, but whose eyes glowed with inner fire, whose presence radiated power that seemed barely contained by flesh. and we were waking from a long sleep, remembering what we had forgotten, reclaiming what had been taken, and I could hear a voice, or perhaps many voices speaking as one, saying, "You are the fulfillment of the prophecy. You are the dragon awakening. You carry in your very DNA the codes that were planted long ago. And now the signal has been sent, the activation has begun, and nothing can stop what is coming. The return of the serpent wisdom, the emergence of dragon consciousness in human form, the transformation of a species that forgot it was divine and is now remembering." These dreams left me shaking, desperate to understand if they were personal psychology or collective transmission, individual fantasy or ancestral memory surfacing. My journey began not with esoteric texts, but with biology, specifically with research into what mainstream science dismissed as junk DNA, the vast majority of the human genome that does not code for proteins, but that I suspected held something far more significant than genetic debris. I discovered that this non-coding DNA contained patterns that looked like language, like information storage, and that certain people showed unusual activation in regions that remained dormant in most of the population, and that these activations correlated with reports of spontaneous psychic abilities, Kundalini awakening, encounters with what people described as dragon energy or serpent power. I found that ancient traditions across the globe spoke of the sleeping dragon or coiled serpent at the base of the spine, and that awakening this force was the central practice of transformation in traditions as diverse as Taoism, Tantra, and the Egyptian mysteries. In recurring visions that intensified as my research deepened, I found myself witnessing not mythological past, but actual history, seeing a time when beings who embodied fully awakened dragon consciousness lived on Earth, teaching humans who were ready the practices for activating their own latent capacities. And I saw that these beings were not separate species, but were humans who had achieved full activation of the dragon codes, whose kundalini had risen completely, whose consciousness operated from dimensions that ordinary humans could barely perceive. The path that followed these visions was one of searching for the dragon prophecy, for any text or tradition that spoke of the awakening that I felt happening in my own body, and that I was hearing about from people around the world who felt the same fire rising, the same knowing that something was changing, that dormant capacities were activating, that what had been suppressed for millennia was returning. I found fragments in Celtic texts about the sleeping dragon beneath Britain that would wake when the time was right. I discovered Chinese prophecies about the dragon revealing itself in human form in the age when heaven and earth reunite. I located Mesoamerican calendars that marked the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, not as external deity, but as consciousness awakening within humanity itself. Each discovery brought resistance, both internal and external. There was the materialist worldview that insisted dragons were mythology, that Kundalini was metaphor, that any experience of serpent power was psychological phenomenon with no basis in objective reality. There was the religious conditioning that had demonized the serpent since Eden, that insisted dragon consciousness was demonic deception, that the fire I felt rising was dangerous or evil. There was my own fear of what it meant, if the prophecy was real, if I was actually experiencing dragon awakening, if I had responsibility to this ancient lineage and to the collective transformation it served. Yet there were also validations that I could not dismiss. I met others who were experiencing the same activation, who used the same dragon and serpent imagery to describe what was happening in their consciousness and energy bodies without having been taught these symbols. I discovered that the increased solar activity scientists were measuring corresponded with increased reports of spontaneous Kundalini awakening, as if the sun itself was sending the activation signal. Most compellingly, I found the scroll, the actual dragon prophecy, preserved by a monastic lineage that had understood they were guarding something that predated Christianity and would be needed when the Age of Awakening arrived. When I finally decoded the complete scroll, when I read the full dragon prophecy in its original form, rather than the fragments that had survived in various traditions, I understood why it had been so carefully hidden and why it was emerging now. The prophecy was specific and detailed, describing not vague future, but actual mechanism of awakening, explaining that dragon consciousness was not external force, but was the fully activated potential of human DNA, that what modern genetics called junk was actually the dormant dragon codes, and that these codes were designed to remain dormant until humanity reached a certain level of development, until the cosmic cycles aligned, until the collective trauma that had caused the forgetting began to heal. The scroll described how the dragon consciousness had deliberately withdrawn from active presence on Earth during what it called the Age of Density, the period when humanity needed to experience separation, limitation, forgetting, in order to develop certain capacities that could only emerge through that experience, but that this age was ending, that the cosmic calendar was completing its cycle, and that the dragon codes were now receiving activation signals from multiple sources, from the galactic core, from the sun, from the Earth herself, and from the collective consciousness field, as more and more individuals awakened and contributed to the morphic resonance that made awakening easier for others. The prophecy described what would happen as the dragon awakened, first in individuals who would feel Kundalini rising spontaneously, who would have visions and experiences that seemed impossible, who would develop capacities that mainstream reality said were fantasy, and these individuals would be confused, frightened, often pathologized or ostracized. But they were the advance wave, the ones whose nervous systems could handle the intensity of the initial activation. Then the awakening would spread, becoming more common, more accepted, more integrated, as the practices and understandings emerged that allowed people to work with the dragon fire safely rather than being overwhelmed by it. And finally, the prophecy said, would come the collective activation, when enough individuals had awakened that the tipping point would be reached and the entire species would shift, would remember its dragon nature, would embody the consciousness that had been dormant, and this shift would look like apocalypse to those resisting it, but would be experienced as homecoming by those who embraced it. If you want a practical, step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The scroll included practices, specific techniques that the ancient dragon teachers had used and that the prophecy said would be needed when the awakening began. Methods for safely raising the Kundalini, for integrating the dragon fire, for developing the capacities that awakened dragon consciousness brings, heightened intuition, energy perception, manifestation ability, multidimensional awareness, and most importantly, the remembering of unity, the direct knowing that all separation is illusion and that consciousness is fundamentally one. The prophecy warned that the awakening would be opposed by forces that benefited from humanity remaining asleep, that structures of control, whether religious or political or economic, depended on people not knowing their power, and that as the dragon awakened, these structures would fight harder to maintain dominance, would create fear and division, would pathologize and demonize the awakening, but that this resistance was ultimately futile because the cosmic timing could not be stopped. The dragon codes could not be deactivated once the signal had been sent, and what had been prophesied would manifest regardless of human resistance. The scroll ended with words that made my hands shake as I read them. When you who carry the dragon blood find this prophecy, when you read these words and feel them resonate in your very cells, know that you are the fulfillment of what was foretold, that the fire rising in your spine is the dragon waking in you, that the visions you see and the knowing you carry are not delusion, but are memory returning, and that you have work to do teaching others, anchoring the frequency, midwifing the birth of dragon consciousness in collective form. And though the task seems impossible and the forces arrayed against awakening seem overwhelming, remember that you are not acting alone, that you are part of a network that spans the globe, that you are connected to lineage that reaches back to the first humans who achieved dragon activation, and forward to the humans who will look back on this time as the great turning, when humanity remembered it was divine and stepped into its birthright as co-creators of reality, as conscious participants in cosmic evolution, as dragons walking in human form. The climax of my journey came not through reading, but through direct experience, a night when the fire that had been building in my body for months suddenly surged with such intensity that I thought I would be consumed. When the Kundalini exploded up my spine and burst through the crown of my head, and I was no longer human consciousness having a spiritual experience, but was dragon consciousness remembering itself in human form, and I understood not intellectually, but through direct knowing, that the prophecy was true, that I was dragon awakening, that we all are, that humanity is not separate from the dragons of mythology, but is the dragon in its larval form, and that what we call ascension or awakening or enlightenment is actually metamorphosis, the transformation from the limited form into the fullness of what we were always designed to become. In that state of dragon consciousness, I perceived reality from perspective that saw through time, that understood the patterns and cycles, that knew the awakening was inevitable and was already happening, and I encountered what I can only describe as the Dragon Collective, the unified consciousness of all who had ever achieved full activation, whether in ancient times or in the present moment, and they showed me that I was not special or chosen, but was simply one of millions who were activating now, who were feeling the fire, who were remembering the truth, and that together we were the fulfillment of the prophecy, the return of dragon consciousness to a world that had forgotten, but was now ready to remember. When I returned to ordinary awareness, I was changed at the fundamental level, no longer able to pretend I was merely human, knowing myself as dragon in human disguise, as ancient consciousness wearing temporary form, as carrier of fire that had been sleeping but was now fully awake. The months that followed were of integration and service, learning to function in human world while carrying dragon consciousness, finding others who were experiencing the same activation, creating spaces and practices for the safe emergence of the fire that was rising in so many. I began teaching what the scroll had shown me, what my direct experience had confirmed, that the dragon prophecy was not about waiting for some future event, but was about recognizing what is happening now, that the signs described in the prophecy are manifesting, that children are being born with capacities their parents never had, that the earth is shaking off old structures through earthquakes and storms, that hidden teachings are emerging from every tradition, that those who carry the dragon blood are feeling the activation, and that this is not random, but is the precise unfolding of what was prophesied millennia ago. I created a comprehensive work titled The Dragon Prophecy, Recognizing and Embodying the Awakening. In it, I presented the scroll, the practices, the understanding of dragon consciousness as human potential fully activated, and guidance for those experiencing Kundalini awakening to recognize it not as personal crisis, but as participation in species-level transformation. My final work in this phase was to establish the Dragon Awakening Network, a global community of those who recognized themselves as dragon consciousness in human form, who were committed to practices that safely integrated the fire, who supported each other through the challenges of awakening, and who dedicated themselves to anchoring dragon consciousness on Earth, to being the bridge between what humanity has been and what it is becoming. On a night when we gathered on Skellig Michael itself, standing where the monks had guarded the prophecy for centuries, I spoke to a circle of activated dragons, what we had all come to know. The prophecy they tried to bury, is awakening because we are awakening. The dragon they said was mythology is revealing itself because we are the dragon. The fire they called dangerous is rising because it is our nature, our power, our birthright as consciousness embodied. We are not waiting for the prophecy to fulfill. We are the prophecy fulfilling itself. Every Kundalini awakening, every moment of dragon fire, every person who remembers they are more than human, we are the return that was foretold, the transformation that was promised, the emergence of a species that forgot its divine nature and is now remembering. Not because we are special or chosen, but because the cosmic timing has arrived. The codes are activating, and the dragon that slept for ages is opening its eyes in us as us, and nothing will ever be the same, because once the dragon wakes, it cannot be put back to sleep. Once the fire rises, it transforms everything it touches. Once the prophecy activates, it must complete its course. And we who carry this consciousness, we who feel this fire, we are the living proof that what they tried to bury cannot stay buried. That what they called myth is manifesting. That the dragon is here, awakening in human form, transforming reality itself. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.